Hello, hello.
How's it going? Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Nice.
Hey, Stephanie, are
Hi,
you
nice.
our running the runner of the Zoom?
Yep, I am.
Great, thank you. Nice to meet you, I'm
Nice to
Tanya.
meet you.
All right, maybe we'll give a few seconds. Or you let me know, Stephanie, when I can start, and I'll introduce Terry.
People I know.
Yeah, we are recording, so you can start when you're ready.
Okay, great. You're not seeing a whole bunch more people jumping on.
We have 47 people right now.
Perfect. Then I'll jump right in. Terry, are you ready?
Yeah, I am. We got one
Okay, awesome. Welcome, everybody. Good morning to our special Partners in Flight Western Working Group webinar seminar. Our speaker today is Terry Rich, who is going to talk to us about how individual attributes predict bird conservation behaviors among birders in the United States. Terry is a Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Ecology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, an MS in zoology from Idaho State University, and he's currently pursuing a PhD in public policy from Boise State University. Terry worked for the Bureau of Land Management for 20 years and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for 15 years. He coordinated the International Bird Conservation Partnership, Partners in Flight, from 2000 to 2014. Terry is an honorary lifetime member of the American Ornithological Society. He and his wife, kids, and grandkids all live in the Treasure Valley. So thank you very much, Terry, for presenting today. And you just need to, I guess, share your screen and bring up your slides, and then we'll take it away.
Okay, let me see if I can find those buttons. Thanks for that, Tanya. It was a really good introduction. I guess I wrote it myself. So there's that.
It's a great introduction.
All right, let's see. Share screen. How's that look?
Good, and you just need to put it into full screen slideshow view. And then it'll be great.
How about that?
Perfect.
Great. Hey, it's really good to see many of you. A lot of you people are hiding behind with your video cameras off for some reason. Probably hair uncut, not shaved, pajamas. So that's okay. But anyway, it's nice to see people who I actually recognize out there. So again, thanks to Tanya and Kibio for setting this up. When I retired in, man, I can't believe it's been so long already, 2014, I decided to go back to school the following year to get a PhD. I always wanted the degree, and then I finally found a topic that I was really jazzed about. I didn't really want to go out and band and capture birds for 5 years or something like that. So here's something I could sort of do in my living room and get out as I used to get out to go to conferences. I really miss that a lot. So anyway, I decided to study birder behavior because it had bugged me for a long time that, you know, the science arm of Partners in Flight especially, but also the other initiatives are bringing so much good content to the decision makers and to the policy makers, but it seems like we're never really getting, you know, the traction that we thought we deserved, and especially that the birds deserved. So I decided to go and try to figure out what all these birders are doing in the US. So this talk is a pretty good update from what I gave at the Wildlife Society and a few other meetings before COVID. So there's a little bit of stuff in here that you already know, but I want to show you what I'm trying to convey to other people as well. It's not too much of that, but there's a little bit. So my gripe was there seemed to be this huge disconnect between the needs for bird conservation and the birder interest in the United States and the public policies. These things were not really well in sync. I'm going to have to hide somebody here because I can't see all my screen. Let's see, how do I do that? Hang on, I'm trying to hit a button here and I can't hit it. Okay, that's better. All right, so this graphic, I think, conveys that at least to some degree. The public policies I'm interested in are the policies of the 50 state wildlife agencies and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the solid arrow tries to demonstrate that I think the scientific foundation for bird conservation has had a really strong link up to these agencies and has provided a lot of information for them, especially to work on the science side of things, planning strategies, all this stuff we've been doing for so long. But the public interest in birds, it seems, is just not, there's not a connection with the policy making and with the decision makers. Y'all are familiar with all these plans and many more. When I talk to an audience that's not so familiar with it, I go into a little bit more detail on a few of these plans to kind of show all this incredible work that we've been doing for so long now. And then this graphic, and this maybe needs to be updated, so anybody who's in the cutting edge of science can send me an email. But you know, it makes paints the picture. 22% of our species need conservation action, coming from this 2014 watch list. And of course, here's the part that you know, really got me going, this estimate of 45 million people out there feeding and watching birds. And as you know, this is approximately the same number that was found in the previous survey. So, you know, people like to gripe and quibble a little bit about this number. And, you know, I don't care if it's 45 million or if it's 20 million or what it is. There's just a whole hell of a lot of people out there that we're just not engaging very well. One of the little studies I did before I started my research, you can see I need to do this again. In 2013, 2015, and 2017, I searched all the state wildlife agency, not only the home pages, but rather deep into their websites. This is just the homepage survey. So in 2013, none of these terms was located on the home pages of 50 state wildlife agencies: birds, migratory birds, birding, or bird watching. In 2015, there was a little bump on the word birding, but you can see by 2017, that had already dropped out. And basically, it's the same situation as you go deeper into the websites. There's a surprising lack of even the most basic sorts of information. One of the reports I put together for AFWA a couple of years ago, I just went on the web and said, okay, pick a state, pick Kansas. There are all kinds of websites in Kansas about where to find birds, where to go birding, the needs of birds in Kansas, and on and on and on. But you go to the state agency website and none of it is there, none of it is linked there. And that's typically the case. There are a few states notably outstanding, but mostly it's just not there. They're not even linking the stuff that already exists in their own states. So it's like, okay, what's going on here? Why aren't all these birders having a connection to these policy makers and these decision makers? Here is the theoretical framework behind my research. I'm not overly interested in this, honestly, but I have to do it. You can imagine how arcane some of these discussions get in the social sciences. But to briefly walk you through it, this is from Jerry Vasky and colleagues out of Colorado State. I actually have met with him a couple of times, and Mike Manfredo and Terrell, and those people are kind of on the front edge of this human dimensions stuff in natural resources, and talk to them about a number of these items. But basically, this backbone of this thing is that people have these basic personal values, which are very few in number and really hard to change. We don't try to change values. It's too deep. It's too sort of ancient in who we are as individuals. But as you move up to value orientations, these become a little more specific. So you might say, I love birds, but I don't like mammals, something like that. It's a little more specific. And as you go up through attitudes, the theoretical people break this down into ever sort of finer points. Like I said, a lot of this stuff, if you're not really into it, it'll wear you out. You know, I guess it's like trying to drag a non-birder into a 4-day bird conference. You know, it's just a grind. But one of the really interesting ones is the next line up, norm activation. And that's what is it that makes a person do something? Is it their own sense of what they should be doing? Is it their spouse? Is it their friends? Is it their colleagues? What is it that kicks a person into taking action? That's pretty interesting stuff. Then the next step is behavioral intentions. You say, okay, my best friend convinced me I should give $100 to KBO. That's great, but until you actually give $100 to KBO, you know, really nothing has come of any of this. So the behavior, the specific action, that's the endpoint. There are lots of things that impinge on this from the outside. Social interaction comes in all kinds of ways. Demographics, you know, it's well known that people who are more educated and do more, contribute more, people who are in higher income levels, it's usually the case as well. Those are correlations that impinge. What sort of information you get and where you get it, your basic skills and interest in the subject, all these things influence, you know, that ultimate behavior that you take or don't take. And one that I would really like to dig into more deeply, and I might have captured in my open-ended question at the very end of the survey, is significant life experiences. You know, was there an event that just changed your life? You know, you're 5 years old and the bald eagle flew in front of you and sat on a perch. You know, that might be a significant life experience that literally changed your life. So that'll be a qualitative analysis I look forward to digging into later. So a little bit on the methods. This was an online survey of birders in all 50 states. I had 24 independent variables. It was really hard to whittle this thing down to be an 8 or 9 minute survey. I had no idea how fast that is. And I thank all of you who provided input on my survey at several stages for some of you. The dependent variable is 19 conservation behaviors, but one of them is actually open-ended. I'm not going to analyze that today. So I had 18 actions. Did you take it or did you not take it? I ended up contacting 285 individuals and groups, and I got back 5,502 usable surveys. I was really disappointed to get back 984 surveys that were not completed enough to be useful. It made me crazy that people would spend some time completing these surveys, but not go far enough to give me anything to work with. And you know, we hate to throw away data. They're still sitting there, but I don't know what I can do with them. So the response rate, something people always want to know in social sciences. I really don't know what the response rate is. I think it's obviously quite low if there's 45 million birders out there, and I got 5,500 surveys. You know, that's just a tiny fraction. But I think I got a pretty good representative sample, and I'll show you why I think that. Probably likely biased toward those who take conservation action, but that's actually okay because those are the people I want to talk to anyway. You know, if you're not involved in this, I don't particularly care what you think. And if you're not a birder, I really don't care what you think. So I'm not trying to go after people who are not even in the house. The survey was designed and delivered in Qualtrics through Boise State. Those data come into Excel very nicely. And so you can clean up data and look for outliers and errors and crazy stuff. And then I used SPSS with 2 plugins for analysis. Only values at 0.01 are worth considering because the sample size, even though it's not 45 million, it's still pretty big, and that'll kick everything into significance. I should mention before I forget it, I think even if I went to 0.001, it doesn't change the results much because most of the results are very highly significant, again, due to the big sample size. So the independent variables, then I had 4 questions about birding interest and intensity. You know, I'll show you some of the stuff. I had 1 question about those childhood experiences with nature, and social sciences define childhood as 1 to 11. I had 1 question about important people in childhood, 3 questions about general attitudes and values, 4 questions about knowledge and where do you get your information, 1 question about actions that were intended but not taken, 1 question about norm activation, again, who is it that, you know, sets you off to actually do something, and then 9 questions on demographics, and these are really standard in social science surveys. So a few results of this dissertation is almost 400 pages and I'm not done yet. So I'm just touching on a couple of things here. One of the things I was worried about, we hear that, and we know that birders tend to be getting older. That slug of people moving through time is getting older, but you can see it's really, the mean age, yeah, is 64, 65, but you can see I got a pretty good sample from people all the way down, I think, to age 8. So I feel reasonably good about the age spread in the sample. Gender-wise, 57% of the responders were females, 41% males, and the rest non-binary or didn't care to answer. And I've learned that this is very typical, that females tend to complete surveys more than males across almost any kind of survey you can think of. So there's that. And there are all kinds of interesting gender differences that I can't go into today. Because I was hoping for 200 people per state to get a good sample size. I didn't get that. Some states didn't respond very well. So I had to drop back to the Regional Wildlife Association. So this just shows you the sample size by association. So I can go to WAFWA or SIAFWA, you know, with a reasonably good sample size and say, here's what the people in your region think or do. This one really surprised me. People could say how conservative or liberal they were, from 0 very conservative to 100 very liberal. And you can see 800 people slammed the slider to the maximum end of liberal. And even though there's a bit of a spread when you take that one group out, you can see it's very strongly skewed liberal. So there's no previous research on this, so I got nothing to compare it to, unfortunately. A little bit on birding interest. So here are the things I ask people to gauge. Yeah, how interested are you in birding? What do you commit to? And the means aren't really very important, but I want you to look at the ranges. So how many days per month do you bird for at least 1 hour away from home? All the way from none to 31 every day of the month. Species on life list, all the way from 1 to over 10,000. I'm not sure I believe either one of those numbers, but the point is, again, a tremendous spread. And if you look at that mean of 783, at least some of these people are got to get out of town, you know, to get that kind of a number. So there's a smattering, I would say, of international travelers within there. You look at the number of feeders in your yard. This was open-ended all the way from none to 50 for crying out loud. So again, tremendous array of interest in bird feeding. And then types of lists maintained, that is a yard list, a state list, a life list, and so on. A lot of people don't keep any lists at all. I wrote about that in an article in Birdwatching magazine about a year ago. If you haven't seen that, I'd be happy to share it with you. Average of 2, and of course, a maximum of 6. Plenty of people keep every sort of list. In the comments, they could actually tell me yet other sorts of lists they keep. One of the things I got really interested in after reading a lot of literature on the importance of childhood experiences, and you remember Richard Loeb's book, Last Child in the Woods, or No Child Left Outside, you know, that whole thing that kind of blew through AFWA maybe a decade or so ago. I got really interested in this, and there's just a tremendous amount of literature on childhood experiences. I asked my survey respondents what things were important to them as children. Number 1 rated was outdoor play, with 68% of the respondents saying it was very important in their childhood. Vacations to outdoor locations, reading about nature. You can see the numbers as they start to drop off. Notably, youth group activities just never scored well anywhere, so that's pretty interesting. I don't know if the scouts want to hear about that or not. And of course, social media didn't exist for a lot of these people, so that was almost a throwaway for most of the age group, or most of the sample group. Another thing that I try to get a hold of was the importance of different people during childhood. Who was really important to you? And you can see the categories over there. But I was really surprised. So the most important person for most people was father. That was only 37% said it was most important. And a fair number of people said their father was not important, and so on. The mother was not important. Other adults were not important. You'll see at the end that even if I categorize these data and say, well, was somebody important? You know, basically throw all those labels out and just look at who somebody is important. It still doesn't end up playing a role in what people do as adults. I found that really fascinating. You'll see that here at the end. One of the knowledge questions I asked them was knowledge about sources of bird mortality. And if you see the categories over there, the factors, and look down at the judged is how they judge, how important people judge them to be. So basically, people judged every single source of mortality to be very important. There's no, no nuance in this understanding. So they're greatly overestimating the impact of wind turbines. That's maybe not too surprising since wind's in the paper all the time. Way overestimating the importance of towers, and incredibly electrocution, even illegal shooting, which is obviously a local problem in a lot of places. But as far as a population level impact across many species, it's just not a very big factor. And of course, climate change, we suspect, but we don't really know yet. So everything is very important. So this is good to know when you're sending messages about bird conservation, that people are not distinguishing. And if we want to make them focus on collisions with windows, we may be going to have to do some work to tamp down their concern about other factors that just aren't that important. I was dismayed to see how many people were not familiar with all of these basic bird conservation initiatives a lot of us have been working on forever, and especially dismayed after leading Partners in Flight for 15 years, that over 41% of the respondents were not familiar with Partners in Flight. And you can see so on with State Wildlife Action Plan, North American, and so on. And actually, if you look at the bottom, migratory bird joint ventures were the best known, or the most people were familiar with a JV. So again, when it comes to messaging, maybe the mechanism, whatever they're doing, maybe it's the scale, I don't know what, but I think that's worth looking at. It's a pretty big difference. I would also add that, as you have been PIF for a long time know, we've never made a really big push to reach out to birders. I think when the initiative started, in the early 90s, there was a big push. We had a lot of articles in State Wildlife magazines. We had posters. We had all sorts of things out there. But then that dropped off pretty fast, sort of as the flush of interest sort of faded a little bit, and we just got to work for the last 28 years, 29 years. Communication and outreach was never a big goal for us. We focused a lot on science and talking directly to state agencies, again, from a kind of a science angle more than anything. So maybe this isn't too surprising, but I think it shows that we've got a lot of work to do, and you'll see in a minute that there's good reason to do that. When it came to norm activation, by far the biggest factor was just my own sense of what to do, my own sense of what's right. And that's swell, but it doesn't give me anything to work with, because that goes back down and deeply into those values, and it doesn't really give you an entry point into motivating people. But some of these others do. Second in line was conservation organizations. Almost a quarter of the people said, yes, the messages I get from conservation organizations influence what I do. So good, it's good to hear. Birding friends, not so much. And really disappointing, state wildlife agencies and Fish and Wildlife Service, 5% of the people said messages from these agencies influence their decisions on birds and bird conservation. So massive, you could look at it as massive failure, but I rather say massive opportunity. We're just not hitting these people through these agencies. So a quick look just for fun at these 18 dependent variables. What is it exactly you did then? I got to move Tanya's video screen out of my way here because I can't see those numbers. I don't remember them. All right, here we go. So number one, and I think this is really good news, made my yard more desirable for birds. So over 83% of the people said they did that. And of course, we've been pushing, Audubon's been pushing for a long time. We have a good initiative in, at least in Boise right now, I'm not sure it's reaching outside of our Boise area, to really reach out to nurseries and people and home buyers and homeowners and home builders to try to get native fruiting and flowering species into yards. So this seems like something that people are obviously very receptive to. Number two, renewed my memberships in conservation organizations. I was happy to see that. Although if you're losing 25%, this is in the previous 12 months, by the way, I don't think I mentioned that. But if you're losing 25% a year, before long, you're going to be at zero. So it seems to be quite a bit of attrition, even though that was the second most common thing that people did. Sharing content on social media, voting for candidates, contributing to eBird. You can read the rest of those on down the line. So that's the first 9. And then the rest of them wrote emails and letters to public agencies. I was happy to see that. I mean, 43% are doing that. That's great. Led bird walks where you can influence people, join new organizations, and so on down the line. The lowest thing you can see there is wrote editorials to the newspaper, articles for magazines or blogs. It's a little bit surprising since most, I think, outlets are eager to have content if people would do it. So getting toward the significance now, the so what stuff. So which one of these, all these independent variables really predicted these behaviors? So I used binary logistic regression. All 18 models, and one model for each of these behaviors was highly significant, but the variance explained was quite low. So you get that high significance, again, because of the big sample size. The best model I had was an adjusted R-squared of 32. 32% of the variance explained. So not real great stuff, you know, it's getting down toward the weekend. But again, I'm trying to tease out those cause and effect relationships that give us opportunities on what we could do differently. So if you look at which variables entered in these 18 equations, birding interest and intensity variables entered 24 times. So that's a pretty big one. The people who are out there birding are also taking action. The one that surprised and disappointed me, because I really wanted to go deeper on it, childhood experiences with nature, it only entered once in one equation out of 18. So that's like nothing to see here, at least the way I measured it. Important people in childhood never, ever entered. So let's go back to experiences with nature for a second. Even though a high percentage of people said, you know, outdoor play was super important in my life, when you get around to behaviors, it doesn't seem to be showing through as a cause. Important people in childhood, most people said, hey, nobody was that important in my childhood, not even my father or mother. So I'm not too surprised that that didn't come out. 0, never entered the equations. General attitudes and values, 6 times. I don't want too many in there again, because attitudes and values are really hard to get a handle on. All right, here's some things we can work on. Knowledge of bird conservation. So knowledge entered 16 times, information sources, 16. Norm activation, again, that's a little tough to work with. And then a lot of demographics, as is typically the case. Big differences, particularly between male and female. Age didn't have the effects. I can't go into all this, we'd be here all day. Age didn't have nearly the effect I was expecting. Gender has a huge effect. The size of area you live in has a town you live in has a pretty big effect. So there's some demographics that really allow us to target messages more effectively. So I think just two little slides of conclusions, and then we can take some questions. I was really happy to see that the survey captured a wide variety of birders. I didn't really get the big sample I wanted, but I think I got a huge, I got a span of interest that's about as broad as you can get based on the birding interest metrics. As you saw, birders tend to be strongly liberal. A lot of childhood experiences were rated as important, but did not show up as causal in the equations. Nobody, no type of adult during childhood had an impact on behaviors, at least the way I measured it. Birding interest and knowledge of bird conservation was important. So here we go back again to these 30 or 40% of people who have never even heard of PIF, or at least not familiar with us, not familiar with NAWAMP for crying out loud, not familiar with NABC. Maybe that's not too surprising. That's kind of a high level deal, but you've got a lot of people out there that don't know what we're doing. So we can try to reach them. Bird conservation messages had an effect on behaviors, but not messages from the state or the feds. It was conservation organizations, bird organizations that had the punch. So that's good to know. A couple things I want to do next. I still need to bring in structured equation modeling that's more on the theoretical side, to see how well that cognitive hierarchy model, or to see where the strong links are in that based on my data, and then see if there's some predictions that are consistent with the literature or not. So it's kind of the classic academic bit here. I'm really looking forward to, and this I might do after I'm finished with the dissertation, so I don't take any more time on it, but using discriminant function analysis to compare various sorts of groups, geographic regions, people from small towns and large towns. That's a lot of kind of fun analysis. I love doing these analyses. And of course, you can do this till you drop dead and never publish anything. So I got to steer clear of that for a little while. A lot of really interesting gender stuff going on. Man, that's great. Really fascinating stuff. And this is good conversation material for happy hour. You really can get the genders going at each other with some of this stuff. Of course, I need to publish and get out in various journals and popular publications. I really only had a newspaper column and one magazine article so far. I need to get some more of that out. And man, I'm sure I'm not alone. I can't tell you how much I miss going to conferences and seeing everybody and giving talks and sharing information. It's just, it's no fun when you can't get out there. So I'm dying to get back out there. You know, I don't care if it's Omaha or Costa Rica or where it is. Get together with other birders and bird conservationists and, you know, share information, have fun together. I really miss it like crazy. So that's my talk for today. If you don't want to share something right now, I don't know how much time we have, Tanya, but there's my my BSU email, and of course I have a couple others some of you have. If you have any comments, suggestions for yet other analyses or observations on what I presented, questions, anything at all, do drop me a line. I'm still working this thing, and all the feedback I've gotten so far has just been tremendously helpful. So thanks for taking some time to hear this today.
Thanks so much, Terry. That was super interesting. One thing I forgot to mention in my introduction of Terry is that when I first joined with Partners in Flight and started going to meetings in, I think, 2006, Terry is one of those people, you know, he's obviously engaged with the Western Working Group living in Idaho in the West, and very inclusive, inviting, very international in scope. So we miss you, Terry. He's been a great person to help engage other folks like me. But so what I'm just going to do, I have a couple questions that came up in the chat, and then I'll kind of look for hands up, and we'll go through. I'll try and facilitate the question period, which we've got time for. So one of the questions that I noticed came up was with regards to your familiarity slide. Someone asked the question, what about Audubon?
Oh, I didn't ask if they were familiar with Audubon.
Yeah, for conservation type organizations, they asked if Audubon was identified as an option.
I see that, yeah. And, to be clear, I was asking about bird initiatives. So I had joint ventures, NAWAMP, NANCY, so it was not organizations, but initiatives. That was that.
Okay, thank you. And then another question that came up in the chat box was, at what age, or maybe you didn't ask this question, but they were curious, did you ask at what age did a person identify themselves as a birder?
I didn't.
Okay. Are there any hands up before there's one last question in the chat box here. You mentioned large differences in genders taking action. Which gender was more likely to take action?
It depends on the type of action. This may be no surprise. If it has anything to do with social behavior, women kick ass. If it's like keeping lists and leading bird walks, giving talks, that's heavily male dominated. So it really depends on the kind of behavior.
Okay, I don't see any hands up, but if there's somebody
I have a question.
There you go. Great.
Great talk, Terry. Really interesting. I was curious for your binary logistic regressions, if you looked at correlations between your independent variables, if that could influence which ones come out as significant or come out in your model.
Yeah, you know, I looked at that about every way you can look at it. I did data imputation. I did replace with missing values. I threw out variables. I lumped variables. You know, I really wanted some things to show up. I wanted some childhood stuff to show up. So I tried it in all different sorts of ways. And I think anybody who's worked with a fairly big data set in a multivariate setting, you know, you see some patterns and they just stick. And you can futz with it all day long and do this and do that. And those same patterns just kind of live there. So yeah, I definitely looked at that. I threw stuff out. I combined, made indices, you know, and just kind of the same picture keeps emerging no matter what I did. So I feel pretty good about what the signals that are actually in there. While we're waiting for anybody else, I mentioned earlier that getting a survey at 8 or 9 minutes is just killer because I had to throw out so many questions, you know, like when was the first stage you decided you were a birder and things like that. And, you know, the Qualtrics gives you this meter and it's, you know, kept going over in the red. It's too long. People won't finish it. And then you got nothing. You got to keep it short. So that was making me crazy for a long time. And so some of the stuff, you know, you just can't ask it. Just takes too much time.
So there's another question in the chat. Is it, you referred to the 2016 U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service report, and I've always questioned the 45 million. Is it safe to assume that this is mostly folks who have a bird feeder hanging in their yard?
You know, that's not completely true. I was actually surprised. I thought maybe the people who feed birds get off pretty clearly from the listers and the people who are birding so many days per month. But it's not really the case. The bird feeders are scattered all through the level of skill and level of interest. So I'm not so ready to say, yeah, that was you know, 44 million bird feeders and 1 million birders. I think it's a little more. I think we have more birders out there than that story would suggest.
Another question was, what were the top 2 or 3 organizations to target with our research results?
Well, I'm not sure. Look, I contacted 285 groups, and I contacted a bunch of groups that didn't really respond very well. So I think we're talking about 285 groups. We're talking about 500 groups. I think we got to go way more local. And of course that puts a real, you know, that's not easily done. You need people and time to do that. But I think we got to reach more directly to these groups. So you're talking about, you know, I keep using Kansas, I'm just making this stuff up, but you know, the Kansas Birding Association, the Trumpeter Swan Society, the you know, you name it. I've got the list, and I've got a list of groups that didn't respond, but I think we got to go way more detail, way more local. Just shipping stuff out on a website from us or Fish and Wildlife Service or Idaho Fish and Game, well, they don't even do it. The states aren't even doing it. So we could try that. You know, we could try to see what sort of impact we would have at the state level. At least we'd only have 50 to deal with then instead of 500 or 285. And, you know, I started down that path a little bit with the states, working through the AFWA committees, and then that sort of came undone with COVID. And I think that's worth picking up again. We can work through our existing committees at AFWA for that.
Looks like David has his hand raised.
Hey, Terry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Terry, I was going to ask you, having to do with income, did you have any of that measured at all? Whether it's below 30,000, greater than 50,000 for some of your statistics?
Yeah, there's, let's see, I can't remember how many categories I had. I had maybe, this stuff is all pretty standard in social sciences. So I use whatever, it was like seven bins, I think, for education, 7 bins for income. And of course, income and education tend to be highly correlated, and you can pick one or the other. Yeah, you get more action with more education, you get more action with more income. But as we've seen from the American Birding Association surveys of their members, just because you have $1 million in your birder doesn't mean you spend a freaking penny on bird conservation. So there's a relationship there, but it's not maybe quite as solid as you'd think. That R squared isn't as high as you might think.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions from the people? I've got one in the chat box, but. So this question was for Terry, specifically for yourself. Did your child greatly impact your passion for birds?
Oh, sure. Well, I shouldn't say of course, evidently it didn't for everybody. Yeah, but my dad was a big outdoors person, and every Saturday and every Sunday, he worked during a 5-day week, but every Saturday and every Sunday we were out hiking. He was a botanist, so we started out looking at flowers all the time, and would even bring them back and key them out using these gigantic old floral keys, Britton and Brown, if you're familiar with that from Wisconsin. We had dissecting scopes and all that stuff, but I started, looking up and going, hey, what are these birds? And then I started walking on his flowers. He didn't like that too much.
I like that. So I'm curious about that, Terry. Do you think there's something in the way that you asked the question that kind of wasn't able to tease that out for people?
That's my guess. Although I was surprised there was like no signal coming through. It was just one equation had childhood experiences, none had childhood people. I mean, I must have really blown that one, because if it's there, boy, it didn't show up. And again, I have this big open-ended, if you did the survey, you remember a big open-ended question, the very last one, is there something else that I should know about your, why you're a birder, or why you like birding, or what you do. So there may be some stuff there I haven't even looked at yet. It's a big wad of words I got to parse through. But yeah, it would be fun to go back and get with some people who are experts in this kind of research and look at those questions and go again and try to dig into that a little bit. Yeah, I'd like to do that.
Here's another question. So recent social media birding groups and regional birding groups have shown that there can be a real disconnect between what is needed to conserve species and what birders know or do. For example, some conversations have related to a greater concern over bird mortality from research than even building collisions. What can we do practically to help bridge this gap in conversations between bird conservation practitioners and birders?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I already said I think it has to be very local. Which I should. I've been writing a column for a local newspaper for the last year on bird conservation. That's what I do, and I think if all of us did that, that might be helpful. I think I just keep emphasizing, I think you have to go very local. You have to speak to those birders in your community, and those, I mean, I get asked to speak to all kinds of crazy groups I never heard of, hiking groups, I don't know, river enhancement groups. There's all kinds of groups out there, and they don't know anything about it. They're not even birders, but they're receptive to conservation. Say, hey, yeah, I can plant native species. I didn't know it was even important. So just trying to get really hands-on and local, I think seems to me like that's something that's a good strategy. And give them something real to do. I mean, I think the 7 steps or whatever it was that came out of 3 billion birds, cats, windows, give them something really, really specific that they can do and don't feel like, oh, hell, climate change, what am I supposed to do about that? That's, you're probably not going to get too much there.
Yeah, I was curious about that, but your survey occurred before the publication 3 Billion Birds came out. So I was thinking about the 7 simple actions and those being, 7 of your possibilities. You'll have to do another survey and extend the size of that manuscript. There's another question here from Andrew. He asked, were there any questions related to ethno-racial backgrounds?
Yeah, but the sample size from non-white, non-binary was tiny, so I got nothing to work with there. And that's probably pretty typical. I mean, I think that's one of the problems with our group. People like Ted Eubanks and others have been. Gosh, can't remember people's names anymore. A lot have been, well, Drew Lanham, for example, he's been working on this, trying to get the African-American community more engaged in birding. I mean, I think he's spending I mean, that's kind of what he does. So there's some people that really know this and they're trying to do something. Where I live, Boise is a pretty white community. You know, we don't, this is not a minority community at all. So there aren't really very many opportunities for me, again, in day-to-day life to reach out. Other people, obviously, in very different situations. And I don't have much experience or insight into, you know, how do you, you know, start reaching out better. You just treat everybody like we treat each other, or do you need, you know, you have to understand some cultural things, I think, right, before you're going to be really effective. But that's outside of my expertise by quite a bit.
I was, Terry, I was invited to speak at the Urban Wildlife Conference in 2019. It was related to cats, but the theme of that particular conference that year, it was the International Urban Wildlife Conference, and that theme was about diversity. And the keynote speakers really talked about how a lot of non-white communities are often poorer. They're in neighborhoods where they're often renters. There are low numbers of trees. So just the way they grow up, they don't have access to nature the way higher income and usually white communities or neighborhoods have access to. So they're already at this, you know, there's already this disparity in that way. So there was a lot of interesting stuff that came out of that conference.
There's an enormous amount of research in the social sciences more generally. It just doesn't tend to be, you know, kind of right over here in bird conservation. It's a lot of other things. I think I'll just flip. Oh, one of the questions I did ask was, you know, what size town did you grow up in and what size town do you live in now? Kind of looking for that, you know, is it people who were rural kids, you know, lived in rural situations as kids, but that stuff that did not, there was no strong signal there at all. It seemed like if you were liberal in a city, you were more apt to be doing conservation, which is kind of a stereotype maybe.
Just along the note of what came up earlier with kids, just childhood experiences, when I was getting into a little bit of community-based social marketing training with Doug McKenzie Moore, someone asked the question during our training session, you know, what about school programs? And he said, yeah, you know, we don't really focus on school programs because they're usually one-offs. And our research shows that they, you know, these one-off school programs that organizations generally do not end up creating environmentally responsible adults. Like, you know, that's general, but we really need to think about getting multiple experiences, you know. So like you say, seeing whether there's a family connection where it's part of the family is ideal. But anyways, it's very interesting stuff. Am I missing any questions? Because
Tanya,
I see a lot of comments, and I will save the chat and send it to you, by the way, because there's a lot of great comments that you'll probably want to look through later.
Okay, great. I just wanted to comment one little bit. When I was, actually when PIF started, I was in North Dakota at that time, and I spent a tremendous amount of time in Project Wild, like for 7 years, going to classrooms all over North Dakota. So that was a national, it was actually an international program, but it was a national program that had a lot of legs, a lot of state organization, a lot of people going out there for years on it. And I don't know if anybody, I guess I can look it up. I don't know if anybody evaluated, you know, the effect of that, because that wasn't a one-off. That was a year after year after year nationwide effort. Well, if you're familiar with Project Wild, you know sort of the variety of things that were in there, but you know a lot of good basic sort of wildlife principles. Now, did that change the world? I have no idea.
Hey Terry, this is Jeff, and I think Project Wild has been evaluated by AFWA at least once or twice. I don't know where the results are. There's a coordinator for that.
Yeah, I should go. I'll go dig that out. I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner.
That was great. Unless there are any other questions, then calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times. we will save the comments for you. This will be recorded and we'll post it on the listserv. Thank you so much, Terry, for sharing your results today. That were super interesting.
Thank you. Thanks for setting it up.
It's nice to see you, even if it is virtually through the computer. I just wanted to, sorry.
I feel a lot better just seeing some familiar faces. I'll tell you, it means a lot. Great.
Hi, Terry.
Yeah.
I just want to mention one thing. We had 88 viewers today.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, really great talk. Thank you.
A lot of people aren't burned out on Zoom yet. I can't believe it.
That's super great. So just one more announcement before we all say goodbye. Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, February 16th, our next speaker, actually there'll be two speakers. Let me just pull up my document here to tell you about it. So Tempe Reagan and Janice Gardner are going to be presenting about rosy finches. So Tempe will be talking about searching for species of greatest conservation need in Idaho's alpine ecosystems. And Janice will be talking about the rosy finchers, moving a collective of scientists and birders towards conservation. So we will send out a Zoom link for that as a calendar invite again. And we'll see you on the 16th. But thank you very much again, Terry, for the very interesting and engaging presentation.
Thank you. You guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Dave.